Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing things a little differently. We're going back in time, but not like you might think.
Oh, how so?
We're diving into the world of check fraud.
Ah, check fraud.
Yeah, you might think it's a thing of the past, something your grandparents worried about, but it's shockingly relevant, even in our digital age.
It really is. You see headlines about data breaches and online scams all the time. But check fraud is still a major problem,
Right.
costing businesses and individuals billions each year.
That's what I find so fascinating about this topic. We're so focused on protecting ourselves online,
Yeah,
but sometimes the simplest methods, like a good old-fashioned check, can still be exploited.
absolutely.
So our mission today is to equip you with the knowledge to spot check fraud,
Right.
understand its many forms, and most importantly, know how to protect yourself.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that many of these scams hinge on a simple fact: the delay
Okay.
between when a check is deposited and when it actually clears.
Yeah.
That gap in time is where the vulnerability lies.
So let's unpack this. What exactly are we talking about when we say check fraud?
Well, at its core, check fraud is any scheme where someone uses a fraudulent or altered check to steal money.
Okay.
It could be as simple as writing a bad check, knowing there's not enough money in the account,
Right.
or as complex as creating counterfeit checks that look incredibly real.
And there are multiple ways to do this, right? It's not just bouncing a check.
Exactly. Our sources detail 8 distinct types of check fraud.
Okay.
Some are quite straightforward,
Right.
while others are surprisingly intricate, almost like an art form in a way.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What are we dealing with here?
Well, let's start with the most recognizable type: paper check fraud.
Okay.
This is your classic bad check scenario. Someone writes a check knowing there are insufficient funds to cover it. It's also called bouncing a check. And sometimes this type of fraud also involves using checks from closed or even stolen accounts.
So it's taking advantage of that trust we place in a check as a valid form of payment.
Precisely. Now things get a bit more sophisticated with counterfeit checks.
Okay.
These are entirely fake checks, often made using stolen bank logos and account numbers.
Right.
What's concerning is that criminals are using advanced printing techniques to make these fake checks incredibly difficult to distinguish from real ones.
That's unsettling. So it's not just about someone scribbling on a check anymore. It's
Right.
organized, even technological in a way.
Absolutely. Then there's alter checks.
Oh.
In this
Okay.
case, someone manipulates a legitimate check,
Uh-huh.
maybe changing the name of the payee or even the amount. It could be as subtle as changing 100 to a 1,000,
Wow.
or they might completely replace the payee's name with their own.
So someone could steal a check out of your mailbox, change the details, and deposit it.
That's a very real possibility.
Yeah.
Which is why secure mail handling and check storage are crucial.
Right.
And that brings us to stolen checks.
Okay.
These are, as the name suggests, checks stolen from individuals' businesses or even from the mail. These stolen checks are then used as is with a forged signature or altered to benefit the thief.
We're not just talking about trickery, we're talking about actual theft here.
Exactly. And sometimes these stolen checks are used in elaborate schemes like check kiting.
Check kiting.
Yeah, imagine someone writes a check from one account to another, even though they don't have sufficient funds in either account. Then before the first check clears,
Right.
they write another check from the second account back to the first.
Oh.
They're essentially juggling funds, creating an illusion of money to exploit the timing differences in bank processing.
They're playing a dangerous game of financial hot potato.
Precisely. Now, this next one is a bit more hands-on and might surprise you. It's called check washing.
Check washing.
Criminals use chemicals to erase the ink on a real check,
Oh, wow.
things like the payee and the amount.
Really?
Then they rewrite it with their own information and try to cash it.
It sounds like something out of a spy movie. Who thinks of these things?
Well, criminals are unfortunately very creative when it comes to finding ways to make money.
Right.
And sometimes they prey on good intentions. This brings us to overpayment scams.
Overpayment scams.
In this scenario, a fraudster sends you a check for more than the amount you're owed for a good or service.
Okay.
They then ask you to send the extra money back to them, usually through wire transfer or gift cards.
They're counting on people wanting to do the right thing to return the overpayment.
Exactly. By the time you realize the original check was fake, your money is long gone. And lastly, there's check impersonation, which boils down to forgery.
So forging a signature to cash a check?
That's right. The criminal practices and perfects mimicking the account holder's signature to deposit or cash checks from that account.
Okay, 8 different ways to pull off check fraud. Some simple, some incredibly complex. It feels overwhelming. How can anyone keep track of all of this?
Don't worry, it's a lot to take in all at once, but that's why we're here.
Right.
By understanding the different types of fraud, you're already one step ahead. Now, are you ready to delve into how these schemes actually work, step by step?
Absolutely. Let's break it down. All right, so we've got these 8 different types of check fraud. But how do these schemes actually play out in the real world?
Well, let's walk through the typical steps involved.
Okay.
Starting with the creation of the fraudulent check.
Okay.
This could involve anything from stealing blank checks to using sophisticated techniques to print counterfeit checks. Criminals might even use stolen bank logos and account numbers to make their fakes look more convincing.
So they're either starting with a real check as a base,
Right,
or creating a completely fake one. Then what happens?
That's where the forgery comes in. If they're working with a stolen or altered check, they'll need to forge the victim's signature to make it look legitimate.
Right.
And some of these forgers are incredibly skilled.
Really?
They might practice for weeks to get the signature just right, making it very difficult to detect.
It's like a twisted art form, but with serious consequences.
Yes, exactly. The next step is depositing or cashing the check. The fraudster will try to access the funds as quickly as possible before anyone realizes the check is bogus. They might try to deposit it into their own account, cash, at a check cashing service, or even try their luck at a bank.
It's a race against time then. They're trying to get the money before the bank catches on.
Precisely. And this is where the banks play a crucial role.
Okay.
While banks have systems in place to flag suspicious activity, a well-executed fake or altered check might slip through the cracks initially.
Oh, so they're not foolproof?
Not always, no.
Oh.
Banks often have to process checks quickly, especially with mobile deposits and other modern conveniences.
So there's a chance you might not even realize you've been a victim right away.
That's right. That's why it's so important to be vigilant and know the warning signs. It's much easier to prevent check fraud than it is to deal with the aftermath.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about prevention. What can we do to protect ourselves from becoming victims?
Well, the good news is there are many steps you can take to minimize your risk. It all starts with awareness.
All right, let's hear it. What are the red flags we should be looking out for?
One of the most important things is to monitor your bank account regularly.
Okay.
Check your statements frequently, whether online or through your mobile app, and scrutinize each transaction. If you notice anything unusual or unexpected, even a small discrepancy, report it to your bank immediately.
So don't wait for your monthly statement to arrive in the mail.
Exactly. The sooner you catch something suspicious, the better. Another thing to be wary of is slow check processing.
Slow check processing.
If a check takes an unusually long time to clear here, it could be a sign that the bank has flagged it for further investigation.
That makes sense. It's like the bank is giving themselves more time to make sure everything is legitimate. What else should we be looking for?
Pay close attention to any changes in your check patterns.
Okay.
Have you suddenly started receiving more checks than usual, or are the amounts significantly higher? This could be a red flag for check kiting or other fraudulent activity.
So any sudden or unexpected changes in check activity should raise a red flag.
Absolutely. And when you receive a check, take a moment to really examine it, especially if it's from an unfamiliar source.
Okay.
Look for any signs of alteration, like changes to the payee information or the amount. Has the name been tampered with or the amount changed?
Sounds like we need to channel our inner detectives here.
You got it. Any erasures, correction fluid, or mismatched handwriting should also raise suspicion. And don't forget to scrutinize the signature.
Great.
Does it match the one you're used to seeing from the issuer?
Yeah.
Does it look shaky or inconsistent?
So we're talking about knowing what to look for, but also trusting our gut if something feels off.
Exactly. And of course, if you ever receive a check that bounces, it's a clear indication that something is wrong.
Okay.
This is especially concerning if the check came from a new or unfamiliar account or involved a large sum of money.
That's a sure sign that something fishy is going on.
Precisely. Now, apart from being vigilant about spotting suspicious activity, there are proactive steps you can take to prevent check fraud in the first place.
Okay, let's hear those. What can we do to stay one step ahead of these fraudsters?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to secure your checks.
Okay.
Don't leave your checkbook lying around in your car or in an easily accessible drawer.
Right.
Treat it like you would any other valuable document.
A locked drawer or a safe deposit box would be good options, right?
Absolutely. And when it comes to old checks, don't just toss them in the trash.
Okay.
Make sure you shred them using a cross-cut shredder to prevent anyone from retrieving and misusing them.
Okay, so secure storage and proper disposal are key.
What else can we do?
Here's a simple but important tip. Avoid writing blank checks. It might seem convenient,
Right.
but it's essentially giving someone a blank canvas to fill in their own financial details.
That's a good point. I never thought about it that way. Don't give anyone the opportunity to exploit your trust.
Exactly. Always fill out the full amount and payee information when writing a check, and double-check everything before you hand it over. And be cautious of unsolicited offers, especially those that seem too good to be true.
Remember those overpayment scams we discussed?
Yes.
Fraudsters often use these offers as baits, sending fake checks and asking you to wire back the overpayment.
So if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Trust your instincts.
Exactly. And here's a tip that can really make a difference. Consider using electronic payments whenever possible. Digital transactions like wire transfers, ACH payments, or even credit and debit card payments tend to be more secure than checks. They leave a clear electronic trail and are much harder for criminals to manipulate.
It sounds like going digital adds a layer of protection.
Absolutely. And if you do need to use checks, there's one more thing you can do to protect yourself. If you receive a check, especially a large one from an unfamiliar source, don't hesitate to verify it with the issuing bank. You can call the bank directly and confirm the check's legitimacy.
That's a great tip. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to our finances.
Exactly. Now, despite our best efforts, sometimes things happen. What if, even after taking all these precautions, we still become a victim of check fraud?
That's a good question. What steps should we take if the worst happens? So let's say, despite all our best efforts, someone manages to pull off a check fraud scheme against us. What's the first and most important thing we should do?
The moment you suspect you've become a victim of check fraud, the absolute first step is to notify your bank.
Okay.
Time is of the essence in these situations.
Right.
The sooner you alert your bank, the better their chances of stopping the transaction, recovering your funds, and launching an investigation.
So don't hesitate, even if you're just slightly suspicious.
Yeah.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Exactly. And in addition to contacting your bank, it's also essential to file a police report.
Okay, so contact the bank and file a police report.
Yes, this creates an official record of the crime.
Right.
And can be helpful if you need to file an insurance claim or pursue any legal action. It also helps law enforcement track these criminals and potentially prevent them from targeting others.
It's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about stopping these scammers in their tracks.
Precisely.
Right.
Now, because check fraud can sometimes be linked to larger identity theft schemes,
Oh, wow.
it's also a good idea to check your credit report.
Okay.
Look for any accounts you didn't open or inquiries you don't recognize.
That's a good reminder that the impact of check fraud can extend far beyond just the immediate financial loss. It can really mess with your credit and financial well-being.
Absolutely. To further protect yourself, consider placing a fraud alert on your credit report.
Fraud alert.
Yeah, this notifies creditors to take extra precautions to verify your identity before issuing any new credit in your name.
So it's like an extra layer of security to make it harder for someone to open accounts fraudulently using your information.
Exactly. And finally, make sure to document everything related to the fraud.
Okay.
Keep records of all communication with your bank, the police, and any other relevant parties.
Right.
This includes dates, times, names, reference numbers, and any details of conversations.
It sounds like being organized and keeping meticulous records is key to navigating this process.
Absolutely. Having solid documentation can be crucial if any disputes or discrepancies arise later on. It can also help law enforcement build a stronger case against the perpetrators.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the surprisingly sneaky ways check fraud can happen to the proactive steps we can take to protect ourselves,
Right.
and even what to do if we become victims. What's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key message here is that knowledge is power. While check fraud is a real and evolving threat, it's not something we have to accept passively. By being aware of the different types of check fraud, recognizing the warning signs, and taking proactive steps to protect ourselves, we can significantly reduce our risk of becoming victims. And if the worst does happen, knowing how to respond quickly and effectively can help minimize the damage and increase the chances of recovering any losses.
It's all about being informed and empowered. We may live in a digital world, but these seemingly old-school scams can still have a huge impact.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it raises a fascinating question for all of us to consider. As technology continues to evolve and new payment methods emerge, how can we adapt the lessons we've learned about check fraud to protect ourselves from similar scams in the digital realm?
Right.
Because as we've seen today, Even in the age of instant payments and virtual currencies, the same principles of security and vigilance still apply.
That's a great point to ponder. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay safe.